Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. Most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days, almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Unresting, unhasting, and silent as light, nor wanting nor wasting, thou rulest in might. Thy justice like mountains high soaring above, thy clouds which are fountains of goodness and love. His inspiration for this hymn came from, of course, 1 Timothy 1:17. Now unto the King, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Though God may at times seem distant, and though He is invisible to us, He is always invincible. And this is the main lesson of the book of Esther. Now, this is a unique book in that there is no mention of it in it of the name of God. There's no reference to worship or to faith. There's no prediction of the Messiah. There's no mention of heaven or hell. In short, there is nothing religious about it, at least on the surface. But when we look beneath the surface, His hand can be seen moving in the lives of people to bring about His chosen end. And this book shows the sovereignty of God like no other. Though absent by name from the pages of this book, the book of Jewish history, God is present in every scene and every event, and He ultimately brings everything to a marvelous climax as He proves Himself Lord of His people, the Jews. Now, before we get into the story of Esther, I think we need to gain a deeper understanding of God so that we might grasp a greater appreciation for the book that never once mentions His name. Romans 11:33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are His judgments and His ways past finding out." Look at what Paul's saying here. First, God has a mind, which Paul describes as unsearchable judgments. Our human minds cannot find the depths of the mind of God. They're unsearchable. Romans 11:34, "For who hath known the mind of the Lord? Or who hath been His counselor?" What's the answer? No one. Who has known the mind of God? No one. Who's ever given God counsel? No one. His mind, His judgments are unsearchable. A scholar may spend years studying another human being, his life, his writings, his work, and have a deep understanding of that person. But we can plumb the depths of another's mind, but we cannot begin to scratch the surface of the unsearchable judgments of God. Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Theologians have spent lifetimes searching out the traits, the characteristics, the hand of God in the Scriptures. Yet those who are truly honest and humble enough to admit the truth come to the end of their earthly lives acknowledging that they have barely scratched the surface. Being God, His thoughts are beyond our ability to comprehend fully. His mind beyond our ability to completely grasp. And furthermore, God has a will. Now make no mistake about it. His ways are unfathomable. No human can predict or understand the capacity of the depths of God's will. We will never fully understand the plans of God as long as we're on this earth. Yet, wonder of wonders, God can be known deeply in the hearts of those who are created in His image. A.W. Tozer once wrote that God can be known by the soul in tender personal experience while remaining infinitely aloof from the curious eyes of reason constitutes a paradox. Let me read that again. That God can be known by the soul in tender personal experience while remaining infinitely aloof from the curious eyes of reason constitutes a paradox. See, if we come toward God with sheer reason, we will find ourselves resisted, kept at a distance, at a loss of understanding of His unfathomable ways. But if we come to Him with an open heart, in faith, we will find that He's waiting with open arms, ready to accept, to receive, and to fill us with His power. The power of God can be best described as sovereign control. God is in sovereign control, not only of the events of Paul's day, but in the events of our day as well. Now, if you were in the midst of circumstances today that have you wondering what you're going to do or even how you're going to go on, you can rest assured that God's power and sovereign control are already at work. God never knows frustration. He never has to scratch his head wondering what in the world he's going to do with his people like us or with the nations of the world. And we see a great example of that power in my favorite book in the Bible, Daniel. If you want to turn over there, you can, Daniel chapter 4. Now, Daniel knew all about God's unsearchable will and unfathomable mind. And the king during the earlier years of Daniel's life was Nebuchadnezzar, a monarch who thought that he was the sovereign control of the world. And that world was Babylon, a vast empire that had taken over all the kingdoms of the world, including God's people, the Jews. And glorying in his great power, his achievements, and his conquest, proud Nebuchadnezzar strutted his stuff arrogantly about his kingdom. And as he walked, he reflected on himself, as he said in chapter 4, verses 29 and 30. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty?" Then God stepped in. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times, that's 7 years, shall pass over thee, until thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as an oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. Now, after informing the man, "Sovereignty has been removed from you," he caused the king to lose his mind. And precisely as the prophet Daniel had predicted, the king fell into insanity, to the point where he was living in the fields like a brute beast. Nebuchadnezzar lost reason until God crushed him into realizing that he was not the God of his own life, that he was not the sovereign of the world. And finally, the once proud king recognized this, as Daniel tells us in verse 34. "And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation." So who does Nebuchadnezzar bless and honor? The immortal, invisible, all-wise God. The one who, though is invisible, is invincible, and while invincible, remains sovereign. Verse 35. "And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou?" God is in control. Do not for a moment doubt it. God works among the hosts of heaven. He is in the interwoven fabric of everyday life. He works in people like you and me, in every generation and in every year. And we live our lives under the careful, loving, gracious, albeit sovereign hand of God. And the movements of time and history tick off according to his reckoning, exactly as he ordained. Back in World War II, a comic bit of graffiti began appearing on walls everywhere, proclaiming, "Kilroy is here," or was here. Now, this was found on the walls in Germany. It was found in buildings in Tokyo. It was found on big boulders in America. Kilroy was everywhere, it seemed. But make no mistake, God is not like Kilroy. He does not write his name on the walls and rocks of life, but he is there every day, every hour, every tick of the clock. Never doubt the presence of God. God's presence is his invisible providence. Have you ever thought of what providence means? It comes from the Latin word providentia. Pro means before or ahead of time. Videntia is from videre, meaning to see, from which we get our word video. So put them together and you have seeing ahead of time, which is what Almighty God does. He sees events ahead of time, something that we can never do. You know, we're pretty good at history. Our hindsight is almost 20/20, but we're lousy at prophecy. That is the specifics of the future. And stop and think about that. We don't have a clue as to what will really happen 1 minute from now. 1 minute from now, I could drop dead. I have no clue. We have no clue what could happen, even 1 minute from now. We have no idea what's going to happen next. But our invisible God, in his providentia, is constantly, continually, and confidently at work. And you know what? Not knowing drives some people crazy. It sends them into extremes of highs and lows. He blesses us and we thank him. He tests us and we squirm. We weep, we grieve, we cry, we shake our heads. But in the midst of all of this, he never changes. He knows what he's about, and he pursues us with a relentless determination. Another stanza of Smith's hymn proclaims, "We blossom and flourish as leaves on the tree, and wither and perish, but naught changes thee." Now, of course, because he is God, he neither is fickle nor moody. He will have his way, and he will not be frustrated. And if you think he has met his match with you, then you're in for a big surprise. If necessary, he will bring you to nothing to get your attention. He will even crush you if need be, as he did with Nebuchadnezzar, the king, because God and God alone is calling the shots. Now then, you might wonder what in the world all this theology that I've shown you out of Romans and Daniel has to do with Esther. After all, it's the only book of 66 books in the Bible where God's name does not appear. No prayer is offered to the name of God. No one says God is here. He's not writing thoughts throughout the book. I am God. I'm in charge. I'm working things out. I've taken charge of this woman, Esther. No, it's not like that. It's not like Kilroy was here. He's absolutely invisible. Yet he's at work. His will, his power, and his presence are working together on every page. Matthew Henry puts it this way. But though the name of God be it not in it, Esther, the finger of God is directing every minute events for the bringing about of his people's deliverance. So he doesn't sit for a portrait in the story of Esther, but his mind, his will, his power, and his presence are working in concert on every page. Now, in the book of Esther, we find God's power and presence at work through the lives of 5 people to carry out his will. And these 5 people are the main characters of the story. First, we have a king named Ahasuerus. If you're in Esther, look at chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat in the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace. Now at the time that the story of Esther begins, Ahasuerus was in the 3rd year of his reign, of his 21-year reign, which is 485 through 465 BC. And he was a very powerful king. From Shushan, his capital, as he ruled over the Persian Empire from India to the Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. There was no more powerful man on the earth at this time than Ahasuerus. And then secondly, we have a queen named Vashti, verse 9 of chapter 1. Also Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, although we don't know a lot about Queen Vashti, we do know that she was strong-minded. She was an independent thinking woman who went against the command of the king, which was her husband. And ultimately, it is her strong-mindedness that begins the conflict in this story. And then we have a wicked officer named Haman. Now, he's a wealthy and influential officer in the court of the king. In fact, he's second in position in the kingdom, thanks to the king's promotion. We see this in chapter 3, verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Now, then there's a Jew named Mordecai. That's the fourth person. Chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Now many years before Esther's story begins, the Jews had a civil war. And the Jewish nation divided into the northern and southern kingdoms. The northern kingdom was called Israel, the southern kingdom was called Judah. And most of the kings in both kingdoms didn't walk with God. And eventually God judged the people of the northern kingdom because of their stubborn unfaithfulness, and he sent the armies of Assyria against them. And as a result, the Jews of the northern kingdom, Israel, went into captivity, into bondage. And more than 100 years later, God brought similar judgments against the Jews in the southern kingdom because of their disobedience. And Jeconiah was also known as Jehoiakim, the young king of Judah who reigned in 597 BC. He wore the crown only 3 months when Nebuchadnezzar invaded and deported him to Babylon and removed the temple treasures. And 11 years later, in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar returned with a vicious blow, destroyed Jerusalem, and carried most of the Jews into the captivity. Babylon fell into the hands of the Medo-Persians in 539 BC. Ahasuerus became king of Persia around 485 BC, about 100 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Now, the book of Esther is a slice of history from the life of the Jews in exile in Persia. And this story is proof that God did not forget them. And Mordecai was a descendant of one of the exiled Jews. His most significant role was his relationship to the fifth and final character of our story, which is Esther. Chapter 2, verse 7. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took her for his own daughter. The immortal, invisible, all-wise hand of God is working behind the scene, hidden from human eyes. And only a gracious and all-knowing being would have his hand on some forgotten orphan, a little girl who had lost her mother and father. Only such providence would be at work in the life of a lowly Jew living in exile in the great land of Persia, where Ahasuerus ruled in cruel sovereignty and self-serving Haman officiated in evil deceptions. And there's a beautiful message here for anyone who has experienced brokenness, for anyone who has been crushed by life, for anyone who has ever felt that his past is so discolored, so disjointed, so fractured, that there is no way in the world that God can make reason and meaning out of it. And we're going to learn some unforgettable lessons about Esther, from Esther. All right, here was a little girl who must have cried her heart out at the death of her parents. She was bereft and orphaned, yet who would years later become key to the very survival of her people, the Jews. And God alone can do such things. He is in fact, he in fact does do such things, working silently and invisibly behind the events of history. And I know it's a little early, but I think I'd like to stop here because I don't want to start getting into this because I don't think I have time to finish it. So we'll go ahead and we'll pick up